Boa tarde, good afternoon. My name is Simon Roberts, and I'd like to introduce this panel discussion on human performance with a group of human performance experts from QOE Associates. They will all introduce themselves later, but I'm going to start by telling you my story. I've been managing safety and human factors all of my working life. Probably for the first part of that, I didn't know I was doing it because it didn't have a label. But certainly for me, aviation has been a passion of mine, and then aviation safety has been part of that. And it means I'm always wanting to learn more, to challenge our current thinking, and to see what's around the corner. That also led me to join the UK CAA as a safety regulator, which was sort of looking at it from a different perspective. One of my final roles as a regulator was working with ICAO and a group of human performance experts around developing an ICAO human performance manual, which really had these 5 human performance principles that we developed. And I think the key thinking behind it was people talk about human factors, people talk about human performance, without necessarily understanding what it means and how to apply it in practice. So certainly that was the work of that group, and 3 of us sitting here were part of the development of that group. And to me, they all bring together 3 of my favorite subjects, so safety management, organizational culture, and human factors. And you can't separate them. They are so intertwined. And again, it's all about people. And to me, people are the beating heart of aviation. And we need to recognize that the last 18 months, people have been sort of pretty battered and bruised by what's gone on. But again, I think when you look at these 5 key human performance principles, they are really important for us to sort of get our heads around what we mean by this and the importance of it in terms of the aviation, both from a safety perspective, but also from a business perspective. So I feel honored to be here to moderate this panel with this esteemed bunch of human performance experts. And again, in terms of giving them the opportunity to share a little bit of their stories. And also I'm going to start by introducing Jorge Delgado, who is the CEO of QOE Associates, and telling his story and why QOE Associates.
Thank you, Simon. Good afternoon, everybody. Meu nome é Jorge Delgado, eu sou comandante de linha aérea, voo Airbus 330-320, sou também instrutor em 320-330 e vou fazer o resto da apresentação em inglês, uma vez que o resto do painel não fala português. Good afternoon, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard our flight. This is the captain speaking. Welcome to our flight to destination Ponte Sur to establish a Human Performance Center of Excellence. Sorry, this is a joke because it's been so long that I haven't flown and hardly know what's an Airbus anymore or even know what a 330 looks like anymore. Anyway, from an early stages in my career, I developed a passion for human factors, and I read everything I could put my hands on, and that led eventually to do a human factors master's in Cranfield University, where I met Diana, and then moved on to the next passion of mine, which is training, when I became a trainer, TRI, type rating instructor on Airbus 330, 320. And after 30 years of experience and with an international career, I worked worldwide with multicultural environments, and COVID struck last year. So that brought everything to a halt. And after the initial shock of thinking, okay, this is just a couple of months and we're back on flying again, that didn't happen. So I started wondering, how can I put up a project that I've always been passionate about with human factors and training, and how can I give back to the industry? How can I help the industry to become safer and more resilient while using my passion in human factors and training? So I looked a bit at the Portuguese landscape in terms of human factors and did a little bit of a gap analysis and tried to figure out what are the needs and where do we stand in human factors. And I realized that there's no go-to institute on human factors. There's no research institute in human factors. So anybody who wants to establish or have expertise on human factors, there's not a place to go to. In addition to that, when I looked at academia, there's no degrees in human factors, either masters or PhDs. There's no formal training in engineering from the beginning till the end of the course. There's no formal training in human factors in medicine, in business management, and MBAs, particularly in the management, since it's becoming increasingly clear to the industry that decisions taken squarely or just purely financial can have dire consequences further down the line in terms of human performance and human factors. In addition to that, we have a growing aeronautical sector here in Portugal, and particularly in Ponta do Sor. A growing sector in the space arena, in the environmental greener technologies. And when I looked also at what we have internationally, I realized that the amount of technology coming up to be developed that needed support in research on human factors is just staggering, from all the autonomous vehicles, VR, drones, new green technologies. So when I looked at all that, I looked at myself and I said, okay, I have this huge experience. I have an international network of experts that can help put this project together. There's also a lot of European Union financing now coming up that can help us set up the project, and with the local support from the local government here, I proposed to create a human factors research lab, a center of excellence to do. The idea is to have and to work with the industry stakeholders, the partners, the companies, the governments, the research institute, academia, research programs, and partnership with international institutions and companies. We just listened to Cesar talking about the massive amount of research is going to be needed for up-and-coming green technologies in the aviation industry. So this will also help to bridge or to deliver European Union's 2050 vision in terms of a safer, more resilient, and greener technologies. So with this in mind, we created a company already, and in partnership with all the stakeholders, our idea is to, let's say, the business proposition, the value proposition that we're proposing is to include and embed human factors from the beginning of the design, project development, the manufacturing, all the way to certification across the whole board. So this will bring financial savings, this will bring increased sales, this will bring product liability protection, this will bring faster time to market for new products, and this will also mean longer design lives for new products coming in. So with that in mind, I will now pass on to Diana, who I met in Cranfield a few years ago.
Thanks, George. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, George. My name is Diana Franganillo, and as I said, it's a pleasure to be here to talk about human performance, and in particular about my journey from engineering to human performance. So back in 2004, I graduated from the Technical University of Madrid as an aeronautical engineer. And soon after, I joined Airbus Military to become a part of the flight deck and human factors department. At that time, I knew nothing about human factors. So I joined the department, and I was tasked to design the mission console for the refueling operator of the A330 MRTT. Working in the cockpit design in cockpit design is really interesting because you become the voice of the user in front of the rest of the engineering team. Everybody is trying to fight for real estate to get their controls, the indications in the cockpit, and you are kind of like the firewall between them and the end user and protecting their interest. As I said, at that time, I knew little about human factors. I cracked on with the work, and my limitation was that I knew little about the operation, the tanker operation at that time as well. So as you can expect, this wasn't a good cocktail. So my first designs were not great, and I'm quite conscientious. So for me, failure is not an option, basically. So I just started spending more time with the end user. I spent quite a lot of time with pilots, air refueling operators, mission console operators. I started to suck all the knowledge I could from the contractors that we had at that time, specialized in human factors. I grew ears and eyes, so I became a sponge. So I got to understand the mission these operators were trying to fulfill, and I got to understand the context they were working on. So I got better at it. Thank God, I got better at it. And eventually, I was trusted for being one of the key people pursuing the best for the operation as part of the qualification and certification process. So then the output ended up to be good, and it's quite of a proud moment when the aircraft enters operation and then you receive emails from pilot customers telling you this is working, we are really happy with the product. So at some point, I decided to become formally trained in human factors. So as here in Portugal, there is no formal qualification in human factors. I live in Madrid at that time, so I decided to go to Cranfield, where we mentioned, we met each other. So I left to Cranfield. I have to ask for a sabbatical at work for 1 whole year. I have to leave my husband behind for that time. So it was the right decision at that time. Actually, it was the right timing to do it. But it was hard. So it was hard financially and personally. It was an investment. But I'm really glad I did it, because then I got kind of like my background and experience got more round up. So my CV became more marketable. So together with the already experience I had designing with human factors in the field, and then with formal qualification, I could access to jobs that I couldn't have access otherwise. So I have, since I left Airbus, I have helped with the modernization of the London TMA. I have helped with the modernization of the traffic controlling tools. I have investigated quite a number of air traffic incidents and helped the organization to learn from them and to become more resilient. I have worked on the assisted vehicle and automated vehicle, and I have met great professionals in my career as well, which I have learned from a lot. So human factors, in short, human factors is my passion. And I'm really glad I found it, because I wasn't expecting, to have a passion in human factors when I was becoming trained as an engineer. But I just wish it could have been more accessible to me, and also more accessible to other engineers that could benefit from having the tools to better understand, to better be able to observe, and to listen to the end user. So many of us in the engineering world are going to end up working on technology that is going to be used by humans. So why not becoming like a fairer representation of the voice of the user? So my plea here today is like, let's bring human factors training closer to home and closer to engineers, and also closer to managers who can influence to get better systems and a more resilient world. And now, some of the professionals I met during my career. I have the pleasure to introduce you, one of my mentors, Isac. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Diana. My name's Isac, and I started my career in high-performance sport and training with national and international teams. And it was at that point when I started to learn to fly. And it was quite clear to me that all humans, whether they're in aviation, medicine, or in all walks, follow the same principles as we've already mentioned today. One in particular, which has always been at the center of my research, has been communication. And whether it's communication that has not been had and should have been had, or whether it was a poor communication, whether it was a misunderstanding, or the communication wasn't challenged, this is central to many things that go wrong. No one had a clue that they had completely different understandings of the same event. November the 28th, 1979, there was a fatal accident in Antarctica in which all the passengers and crew were killed. Some of the causal factors which were central to this accident were, first of all, that the planning of the flight had a navigational error imported to their system in the night before they flew. This was imported in good faith by the flight planning department because they had perceived there was an error in the very first plans that were drawn up. So unbeknown to the pilots, they changed the waypoints, and you can see in this picture that the on the left-hand side was the route that they should have flown, which was clear of high ground, and the route they did fly on the right-hand side, unfortunately, coincided with Mount Erebus. This was a perceptual belief that the whole crew had. They had briefed 14 days before departure. This discrepancy was not known. It was never known to that crew. So there was a perceptual belief and a disconnect between the man-machine in this situation. The other phenomena which played a very big role in this accident was one of whiteout. And if you've ever skied, you'll know that if you've been in a whiteout situation, it's very disorienting. In Antarctica, in the whiteout situation, in this particular situation, there was a high sun, and it was bouncing off the white of the ice, which gave both pilots a false horizon. So at no time they were flying did they realize they were flying towards high ground. Another horror in this story is that there was a commentator that always flew these flights because they were flights for people to enjoy the Antarctic scenery. In this particular flight, at this particular time, the commentator was not on the flight deck. And had they been on the flight deck, they may have picked up some of the visual cues on the ground. Therefore, there was no counter information to dispel the belief that they believed they were where they were and it was safe. And that's often known as a groupthink situation. The official investigation, perhaps not surprisingly, was pilot error. The Royal Commission of Inquiry, which was then held and chaired by Justice Peter Mahon, talked about an orchestrated litany of lies from the operator. He spent very many years, or months and years in the end, looking at all the aspects of this accident. For the first time ever, they had gone beyond the facts that they would normally gather for an air accident. Another very important person in this was Captain Gordon Vetty, who was part of the company as a pilot. He stepped out of the company because he didn't believe that colleagues of his would have got themselves into this situation without cause. He spent 15 years going around the world talking to experts about all the human performance and human factors issues which were involved in this accident. And I had the privilege of working with him on this and looking particularly at the groupthink and the issues of communication. As a result of this, this was the first report in which human factors was included in the incident investigation. And hopefully, since then, we have had many more reports which indicate and describe the human performance issues. Some years later, I went to, on invitation to ICAO to Montreal at a conference where I met the gentleman on my left. And I think I will say no more. This is Harry.
Thank you. So as part of the elite sport, I've now got the button for the final lap. My name is Harry Nelson, and I've got 5 minutes to talk about an accident that took 18 seconds from beginning to end, but the roots of which actually were deeply enrooted some 50 to 15 years before the event itself. I'm hoping to demonstrate what Anne's just talked about in terms of HF being applied in an accident investigation here. This accident also looks at the fifth one of our principles that were mentioned before. I'll leave it up on the screens for you to look at for a moment. And what we're looking at is an accident that occurred during a customer acceptance. We're talking about a high-power engine run, or series of engine runs actually, but this was the final one, obviously. And it took place on the 15th of November 2007 at 5 o'clock in the evening, at the after end of a tough week of trying to get this aeroplane to a customer. Principle 5, as you read, talks about all the relationships of people, and we'll cover a little bit of that as we go through. I think you'll see. There were 9 people on board this aircraft, which ended up against a wall that you can see, an engine running wall, 3 people in the cockpit, 6 in the back checking customer equipment like video game equipments and stuff like that. All survived, but there were some serious injuries. The engine runner was in the right-hand seat and had decided to run these engines. We needed to run all 4 engines at high power. There were leaks on 2 engines, 1 on each side, which meant each engine had to be symmetrically opposed. And he ran the engines without chocks. At a certain point in the day, the weight in the aircraft decreased to hit a very light weight where the thrust overcame the braking effect of the parking brake, and the aircraft started to move. When it started to move, he reacted by actually releasing the parking brake because he wanted to change over to foot brakes, but of course the airplane accelerated very rapidly because he had not closed the throttles. So the airplane was under full thrust. A few seconds later, it hit 34 knots and the wall just about at the same time, and you can see the impact of that damage. What you can't see until I show you the next picture, which was the damage to the other side of the aeroplane. This is the other side of the wall you're looking at. You're looking at the cockpit and you're looking at the forward section of the same aeroplane. It's amazing anybody got out of this alive. So the obvious cause was known. This was an easy one, and if I go back 20 years in time, we know what would have happened to this operator. I'll leave it at that. But let's look at it from an HF point of view and see if we can thread some understanding through this very strange behavior and strange event from a trained man. First of all, pre-event, immense pressure from the customer leads up to this sort of situation. And this young man had actually offered himself to do this engine run because the previous delivery hadn't gone very well. So he volunteered for this. That's how keen he was. He was fatigued. It was the end of the day. It was the 6th engine run of the day, not the first. The 6th engine run. You can imagine the level of fatigue, of concentration. It demonstrates what we call, in the human factors business, normalization of deviance in not using chocks, because when we investigated this, we found that the non-use of chocks had become prevalent over a period of about 15 years. Very gradual. Slow drift, another term that we use very often. Confirmation bias and normalization of deviance tend to be twin evils. They go together. And finally, there was a language issue, of course, between these two pilots because they were using English, but neither of them was English their natural language. The event was triggered by a distraction because not only was he doing the engine run, he was trying to train a flight test engineer in high-power engine runs at the same time, and there was a question asked, and he showed him a book. And during that period, he took his hands off the throttles. The distraction was complete. He was then startled, he went through surprise, and finally, as he got very close to the wall, as you can imagine, he was overloaded, which is a normal thing. I'm being attacked by flies here. Let's look a little bit deeper at those systemic issues or things a little bit behind the scenes. This was at a time the business context was ramping up from 200 deliveries to 500 deliveries a year. Immense pressure. Remember the date, it was November the 15th. We have 6 weeks to the end of the business year. Everything that is dealt with through production ends up in the delivery center and has to be perfect before it goes to delivery. So they're correcting the aeroplane, getting the aeroplane right, all of that takes place there. Pressure, pressure, pressure all the time. And immense pressure on time. During that ramp up, we had 18 new flight test engineers. He was training one of them. We had five new ground engineers. The ramp up also put the suppliers under pressure. So we had that same deviance with our supplier because the oil leaks were continuing with every engine. We weren't making progress. And finally, of course, the culture that was around at that time was get them out, get the end of the year because financially we need them by the end of the year if they're going to be in the books. And finally, we were still heavily involved with A380 at that time. I'll finish my story with positive outcomes because I think it's a move from the situation Anne was dealing with, which was very personal to her. This was very personal to me because I was the manager involved in this. This man was my man. The team were my team. And I promise you, it still hurts. But the learning from it was that this young guy is now teaching others. We got him back to work after he went through a tremendous low. We helped him through that. We got him back to work. He's an extremely valuable teacher of the kind of things we've been talking about just for a few moments. We also developed a ground operations manual, which is, I think, the first one of its kind, and we improved safety levels. And I'd like to just finish, if I can, on one comment about the customer. The customer who lived through this experience was assaulted on the internet, verbally. And I found it very distressing because this customer had actually behaved very honorably through the whole issue. Not only that, but they finished it and closed the event by suggesting that the same crew, their crew and our crew, got together at about 6 months later and put closure to this event by actually delivering a successful aeroplane. And I'll hand back at that. Oh, sorry.
So I'm hoping through those stories that you can see why these 5 key human performance principles should be at the heart of any organization in the aviation community. And, you know, to me, when you start looking at those and hearing our stories and those examples, I think that hopefully we're setting out that argument behind it. But we've only scratched the surface in a very short period of time. So we're going to open up, have a bit more of a discussion, and we're going to open up some questions. So if you've got any questions for the panel, start thinking about them. I'm going to start off by asking the first question myself. And I guess it's really around the challenge that we have is, you know, why is it so important for industry leaders and managers, senior managers, to have this understanding of how they can influence human performance, both in a positive and in a negative light? I don't know whether Jorge, do you want to answer that?
Well, the way if you don't have the support and the backup of the senior management, you will never implement all these principles. You will never implement and have a culture that supported by these principles. I can give you an example. In my previous work as an airline captain, more than 2 years ago, there was was a case in which a friend of mine, on a turnaround flight at night, he had a maintenance problem in the destination. So the whole thing started to pile up, long story short, and the flight ended up being canceled. He couldn't understand or accept the maintenance view on the issue that was at hand through the interpretation of the minimum equipment list, which lists what we can depart with US inoperative system. So he couldn't get to work out with maintenance, so he kept insisting. At the end of the day, the flight was canceled. So this was a whole major blow to the airline, big drama. He goes back to the hotel, he sits down, he cools down, realizes that actually I could have dispatched the aircraft and I could have gone back to the destination. So at that point, he even called the airline and he said, I've realized my mistake. After the minimum rest, I can go back and take the aircraft back to station, to the head station. And so he arrives back in Abu Dhabi and he calls me and says, George, can you help me with a human factors case defense for my situation? I said, obviously. So I started looking at the books, getting everything ready to go to his place. The next day he calls me and says, I have been instructed and informed that I'm going to be investigated through several processes, financial mismanagement, damage to the company reputation, this whole thing. So at the end of the day, the quick result of this investigation was you have 6 months on the right-hand seat, because he was a captain, he is a captain. And after these 6 months, we will see how it works. Do you come back to the left? Will it do a full assessment? Will it do a short-term assessment, just a sim session? So it wasn't clear. So when I started looking at our OMA, our Just Culture, all this was beautifully written. But the minute that something happened, this goes out the window, and the blame and the heat is on the pilot in this case. So this whole idea of having the Just Culture written, everything is there, you tick the box. At the end of the day, if you don't have a strong manager that says, hang on a second, let's finish the investigation, let's see what we can learn from this. And when you come to the bottom and you see how he was doing everything in his best of knowledge, in his best of ability to make or to dispatch an aircraft safe back to destination, back to station. So even that, according to the Just Culture first paragraph, should have been enough to say, okay, we've learned from this, let's put it through the recurrent, let's see what are the lessons learned from this, and let's put it out so that our community can learn from this. So if you don't have this support, and you just tick the box by having beautifully written the Just Culture, no punishment, everything like this, it works beautifully. But if you don't have the support, it's never going to work.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions from the floor? If you do, if you want to, I don't know whether you've got a roving mic or whether you just want to put your hand up. Failing that, I will continue to ask some questions of the panel. Do we have any questions out there? Okay. Was there a question over there? Sorry. No?
No.
So I guess the question on everybody's mind is, you know, we're going through this pandemic. There's issues. We talk about skills fade. And I guess the question is, what are our experiences, and what are we seeing from the human performance side of how COVID-19 is affecting us? So, Anne, would you like to to provide a little bit of a response to that.
I'll try. I think for me, looking at the professionals that I've worked with in air traffic control in particular, the biggest issue for air traffic controllers and perhaps pilots and other aviation specialists is confidence. If you lose confidence, you lose your whole ability to perform with yourself and with your team. And I think this has been the thing that I found, and how are we going to regain the confidence? The other thing, of course, is talking about managers and senior people. They too have lost confidence, how they manage their work and how they manage their teams. So you have a whole group of people who probably don't declare they're underconfident. And I think we have to really look to see, I'd like to see things slow down rather than rush back into the sort of numbers of flights that we would normally have, but to just think, step back and just really decide what the capacities are when we start getting a little bit normalized. And I think slowing down, which is a horrible thing to say because nobody wants to slow down in aviation, would help.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne.
Can I add a little bit more to Anne? There's an effort now by the industry to set the standard of how do we get back to normal and see what we need to do and set up a minimum level for everybody to comply with. My personal belief is that there should be some leeway in terms of people should have the ability to say, okay, let's imagine an airline is doing 3 sessions of sim before putting you on 2 or 3 sector flights and then releasing you back again. There should be some flexibility for people to say, I'm not comfortable with just the 3 sessions of sim. I want another one. There shouldn't be, because then we play with several things like, for example, experience. It's a different thing to bring people, let's say, up to speed when you have 16,000 plus hours than people who just left the school, finished the 330 course, and now they are stopped, they haven't flown for 2 years or a year and a half. So when you bring all that, and when you put in the personal problems that you have and some very complicated situations that I'm familiar with, you want to be able to have, okay, this may be the minimum, some guys will comply to this or be able to achieve this in this perceived or this set standard, but you should allow people to say, hang on, I don't feel comfortable with just 3 sessions. I didn't like my performance, I need to increase the time in the sim, I need another sector in the flight, without having this, okay, he didn't make it, we have to give him a little bit more. No, it should be exactly the other the other way around. People should be encouraged to speak up and say, I'm not comfortable, I want another session, without any questions whatsoever from any the head of training or the flight ops manager.
Thank you. And as an ex-regulator, it's important to recognize those regulations are the minimum standard, and there's nothing wrong with, and we should be encouraging people to go beyond what is the minimum standard. So another question, and I'm going to direct this one at you, Harry, in terms of what do you see the changing role of people in the aviation system in terms of the future, and when we start looking at future in terms of technology and where we're going?
Oh. Why did I get that one?
Can't help with that.
Well, I probably will not get a good answer. My last job was to try and predict where the next accidents were going to come from. I'm worried right now because one of the legacies from COVID, leading back to the last question, is that we've lost a lot of experience. And whilst we can perhaps hit the numbers of flights that are going to be flown that we flew in 2019, I'm not convinced we're going to achieve the same integrated safety levels that we had then, because we've washed out a massive load of experience from key roles. And I don't want to go into quoting places, but I know the names. I also know that there's been a massive turnover of people in certain specialities, which means we've got very young, great, keen, great, but yet untrained people in those roles, or inexperienced. It's not their fault. In fact, hands up to them, as an opportunity there for them. But I'd like to kind of come back to answer this a slightly strange way and come back to the managerial question a little bit, because the world is a little bit short of a few things at the moment, I think. I speak as a slightly older person. I heard trust being mentioned in one of the lectures this morning, one of the presentations. The word trust, I think, is going to be a key one, and it leads back to the confidence word that Anne was talking about. But to get trust, we've got to be back in the world of the truth. And this strange world we live in of media and counter-media and false news isn't as much about truth as it used to be when I was a kid. And I think we need to get back to a bit of that. And finally, I would say the final T in my 3 T's is tolerance. And when we look at the managerial group, some people have managed excellently, they're brilliantly. Others have been not quite so good. But because I suggest tolerance is a good way to go, it's not their fault. It's because they haven't had the human factors experience, they haven't had the education they need to deal with people the right way. So leave it at that?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I guess for me, the important thing about those 5 HP principles are we should be looking at them in a positive light. Those 5 human performance principles have saved the day on many occasions, because no flight goes perfect to the plan, and therefore we rely on people to save us from those situations. So I'd like to say thank you to the panel members. So they will be around tomorrow, so there'll be opportunities to talk to them, ask questions. If you want to know more about us, then you'll find us on LinkedIn, or and we have some pamphlets if people want to come and collect us or talk to us.
We'd love to meet,
thank you.
Talk to you. Yep.
Thank you very much.